Beijing's Hong Kong security law means people there are no longer free, and Australia goes after a pro-Beijing politician. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. July 1st was the 23rd anniversary of the day when the UK handed Hong Kong over to Communist China. And the Chinese Communist Party is celebrating with a national security law that threatens everyone in Hong Kong. Well, it doesn't threaten Chief Executive Carrie Lam. She's doing A-OK. The Chinese Communist Party had announced in May that they were going to pass a national security law in Hong Kong. But we didn't know at the time what would be in it. Well, now we do. And it's bad. Really bad. For everyone but her.
Permanent and non-permanent residents of Hong Kong can now be imprisoned for up to life for crimes of succession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. To enforce the measures, a new security agency has been set up, which isn't under the jurisdiction of local government. It will be the first official presence of mainland security and intelligence agents, whose powers will go beyond local laws. It also allows for serious and complex cases to go to mainland courts.
Okay, so there are going to be Chinese security agents and spies based in Hong Kong. Well, they were always in Hong Kong, but now they're official. And they can arrest people and send them to mainland China for trial, where they will be convicted since courts in China have a 99.9% conviction rate. And they could go to prison for the rest of their lives. Oh, and even in Hong Kong, there can be secret trials without juries and with judges handpicked by the chief executive. Shelley, I know we don't usually do these for China Uncensored, but I really need a mental health break right now. Puppies! Yes, puppies! I hope you enjoyed the puppies, because the security law gets way worse.
Article 38 of the new law also purports to apply to offenses committed outside of Hong Kong by non-residents of Hong Kong, and this likely includes Americans. This is outrageous and an affront to all nations.
Yes, according to Article 38, this law applies to anyone, anywhere in the world. I mean, technically, they're saying it applies to anywhere outside Hong Kong. So I'm pretty sure it even applies on Mars. Watch out, Marvin. Zhang Xiaoming from Beijing's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office said, "The law is a birthday gift to Hong Kong." That's ridiculous. It's also a birthday gift to everyone outside Hong Kong. And that includes me. It appears even I could be punished under this new law if I go back to Hong Kong. But my being arrested isn't the reason I don't plan on going back. The real danger is that anyone I come in contact with in Hong Kong could be accused of colluding with foreign forces. For example, according to Article 29 of the National Security Law, anyone who conspires with foreigners to provoke hatred of the Chinese government or the authorities in Hong Kong could have committed a criminal offense. Now, I don't actually provoke hatred of the Chinese government, but that's probably not how the Chinese government sees it. According to China law expert Donald Clark, if you've ever said anything that might offend the PRC or Hong Kong authorities, stay out of Hong Kong. And I believe that over the past 8 years, I might have said a few things that offend PRC and Hong Kong authorities.
The definition of the crimes, separatism, subversion, terrorism, all of these things are still, in our view, open to abuse by the authorities and could possibly be used to punish people for things that should be protected activities, particularly things related to freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, that type of thing.
I mean, sure, this sounds bad, but hey, North Korea has praised the Hong Kong security law, so how bad could it be? Actually, I think Pompeo said it best.
Free Hong Kong was one of the world's most stable, prosperous, and dynamic cities. Now it will be just another communist-run city where its people will be subject to the party elite's whims. It's sad.
Yes, it is sad. And it's sad that so many politicians and corporations have made it possible by supporting the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. Shelley, I need another mental health break. Oh, look at that little guy. Well, I feel better. Now, every year on July 1st, the anniversary of the handover, there have been demonstrations against the Chinese Communist Party. We were there last year, and this is what it looked like. Sure, there were 5,000 riot police, but back in those days, just 12 months ago, they actually exercised a bit of restraint, comparatively. This year, however, Hong Kong authorities kicked it up a notch. A very large notch.
Hong Kong police arrested more than 300 people on Wednesday as protesters took to the streets in defiance of sweeping security legislation introduced by China. Police fired pepper pellets before arresting protesters inside and outside the luxurious Times Square shopping mall. Police said they had made more than 300 arrests for illegal assembly and other offences, with 9 involving suspected violations of the new law. Earlier on Wednesday, water cannon was fired and riot police used pepper spray on protesters and press at close range.
Hong Kong police were even armed with this brand new fancy purple banner. It warns people that displaying banners or shouting slogans might be a crime under the national security law. So these "Heaven Destroys the Chinese Communist Party" posters from earlier this year might not be such a good idea anymore. But even though I am completely crushed by this, Hong Kongers are still managing to protest with their usual dry wit and humor. You guys really are something. For instance, this was the very first person to be arrested under the national security law. He had a Hong Kong independence flag. But wait, if you look very carefully, he wrote a tiny "bu yao," or "I don't want" in Chinese, and a tiny "no to" in English. And is saying no to Hong Kong independence a crime? Here's another one. Graffiti that says, "Arise ye who would not be slaves." That's not subversive. It's the first line of the Chinese national anthem. And in Hong Kong, it's now illegal to insult the national anthem. So they're just being patriotic. For the most part, the international community has been very unhappy about the national security law. The Trump administration is rolling back Hong Kong's trade privileges with the United States. They're also imposing visa restrictions on Chinese officials. Congress has unanimously passed the Hong Kong Autonomy Act. It sanctions Chinese officials responsible for undermining Hong Kong's freedoms, and also sanctions banks that do business with those officials. The UK is now officially offering a path to citizenship for 3 million Hong Kongers. And Taiwan has opened a government office to help people fleeing Hong Kong. But meanwhile, things are looking bleak in Hong Kong. According to the New York Times, a museum that commemorates the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre is rushing to digitize its archives, afraid its artifacts could be seized. Booksellers are nervously eyeing customers, worried they could be government spies. Writers have asked a news site to delete more than 100 articles, anxious that old posts could be used against them. And remember activist Joshua Wong, who has totally never interacted with hostile foreign forces before? Well, just hours after the security law was passed, he and other prominent activists resigned from the pro-democracy group Demosisto. And then, Demosisto disbanded entirely.
I will probably be the prime target of the new law. But what makes me fear is not my potential imprisonment, but the gloomy fact that the new law will be the threat over the city's future.
And now, despite Carrie Lam's assurances that the security law would not affect Hong Kong's freedoms, the Hong Kong government has now declared that one of the most popular protest slogans is pro-independence, secessionist, and subversive, and thus criminalized. The slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," has been shouted at pretty much every protest for the past year. It's even appeared in Iceland, which has now broken the national security law. Yes, the entire country. So the Chinese Communist Party is doing its best to strangle Hong Kong. But Hong Kongers aren't done fighting yet, and it's a dangerous road ahead. You know, before we finish this episode, I think we need one more mental health break. Maybe not a puppy this time. Shelley? Shelley, I don't like this. Stop. Stop it! Let's just stick to puppies. And stay tuned after the break, because we'll head to Australia, where the CCP is also trying to undermine liberal democracy. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Well, I tried to warn you, Australia. 2 years ago, I braved the dangers of the Australian bush to tell you about the dangers of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Communist Party is still conducting a massive influence campaign on Australia today. But the good news is that Australia is fighting back. This is Shaukat Mosselmain. He's not the one fighting back. Mosselmain is a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council for the Labour Party. The Labour Party is Australia's main left-leaning party. And New South Wales is Australia's most populous state. So, Mosselmain is a state-level, not a federal-level official. It's like being a state senator in the US. And now, he's at the center of an international espionage investigation. It's being led by ASIO, Australia's version of the FBI. Why is ASIO looking into Mosselmain? Well, he's been a very vocal supporter of the Chinese Communist Party. Just how vocal? This vocal.
The only way for China to reach its potential is for China to force a change to the rules and create a new world order.
At 6 a.m. Friday morning, a dozen officers raided his suburban Sydney home. They searched his house and then his cars, because ASIO fear his political office may have been infiltrated by a foreign power, China.
That is insane. Following the raid, he was suspended from the Labour Party. Now, Mosselmain has not been charged, but if he is, he will be the first under Australia's new foreign interference law. The law was passed back in 2018, and China was not pleased. Even though that Australian law didn't name any country in particular, it was clearly about China. I'm sure this won't surprise you, but Mosselmain was a vocal critic of that law. At the time, there were several high-profile cases of Australian politicians allegedly being influenced by Chinese money. A lot of it is tied to this man, Chinese billionaire Huang Xiangmo. He's been linked to the United Front, a branch of the Chinese Communist Party itself. Simply put, the United Front's job is to expand China's influence overseas. In 4 years, Huang Xiangmo gave almost 2.7 million Australian dollars to the 3 biggest Australian political parties. For example, he allegedly gave $100,000 to a New South Wales Labour Party official. That's the same local party that Mosselmain belonged to. I say allegedly because that donation amount was illegal, so it was funneled through $5,000 cash donations from restaurant staff. Nothing fishy there. Here's another New South Wales Labour Party politician, Eric Rosendahl. In 2013, he resigned to take an executive job at a property development company owned by Huang. 3 weeks later, a friend of Mr. Huang's, Ernest Wong, was catapulted into Mr. Rosendahl's upper house seat. The upper house is the Legislative Council, the same one that Mosselmain is in. In fact, Mosselmain was appointed to his seat in the Legislative Council to replace Henry Tsang. Tsang resigned in 2009 after revelations he failed to declare gifts and accommodation from Chinese-backed construction group High Trade. But wait, there's more. Bob Carr is the former Labour Party Premier of New South Wales. After he left office in 2013, he founded a think tank, thanks to the help of a $1.8 million donation from Huang Xiangmo. That think tank has been called a China propaganda arm, which is why Bob Carr has been called Beijing Bob. And then there's Sam Dastyari, a former federal-level MP who's been called Shanghai Sam. Huang Xiangmo gave Dastyari thousands in campaign contributions. Dastyari also got almost $1 million for the Labor Party from Huang. Dastyari defended China's territorial claims in the South China Sea, which is at odds with his own party's policy. And when Dastyari found out Huang Xiangmo was being spied on by Australian security agencies, he personally went to Huang's mansion and warned him his phone was being tapped. So you can see why Australia suddenly became keen on having a new foreign interference law. Now again, Moslemain has not been charged with a crime. It's only that federal authorities executed a warrant to search his house and cars. This is what Moslemain said was going on.
Firstly, I'm informed I am not a suspect in this investigation. The investigation is into certain other people allegedly advancing the goals of a foreign government, namely the People's Republic of China.
But there are concerns that he follows a very similar pattern of other Australian politicians who have fallen under Beijing's influence. He's taken at least 10 trips to China, sometimes paid for by Chinese officials. Besides his speech about how China must lead a new world order, he's given interviews to Chinese state-run media about how China and Australia must have economic cooperation. He said China today is on the rise. That's a fact. Some Australians have not as yet come to terms with this fact. He's also praised China's unswerving leadership in handling the coronavirus. For the People's Republic of China, President Xi stepped up and provided that leadership. He mustered the resources of the nation and together with the great people of China, fought it and contained it. The combined phenomenal effort of the state and the people in the fight to contain the virus was breathtaking. Well, I agree. China's coronavirus response was breathtaking, in that the CCP tried to cover it up, and so a lot of people ended up dying from pneumonia. So, this isn't Moslemain's first Chinese influence rodeo. He got in trouble earlier this year for praising Xi, and again after it came out that he had written an opinion piece published in China about how the obsolete scum of white Australia were responsible for anti-Chinese sentiment. Moslemain also had his very own Huang Xiangmo. His name was John Zhang, and he has very clear links to the CCP's United Front. Moslemain hired Zhang as a staffer and speechwriter. Oh, now I get why he was saying all those positive things about the Chinese government. Zhang is listed as a vice chairman of Australia-China Economics, Trade and Culture Association, which some China experts say has become a leading Chinese Communist Party-aligned organization in Australia. Zhang also completed a propaganda training course in Beijing run by the Chinese Communist Party in 2013. According to Chen Yongling, a former Chinese consulate official who defected to Australia in 2005, that course isn't for simps. Not everyone can go. You must be a potential leader, not simply a small pawn. Zhang was also a chairman of the Australian Shanghaiese Association. Moslemain is a member too. Moslemain is also a member of the Australian Chinese Association. According to Clive Hamilton, author of Silent Invasion, China's Influence in Australia, those groups are linked to the Chinese government. Why would Moslemain hire someone like John Zhang? Obviously, we can't know for sure. Zhang may have said he could help mobilize local Chinese constituents. And there are a lot of Chinese constituents in New South Wales. But for now, Moslemain is trying to paint the investigation as a political witch hunt.
I'm aware that what might start as perhaps a police concern could quickly become a political witch hunt.
He says it like it's a bad thing. Witches are dangerous. Except for you, Sabrina. Moslemain is also trying to reframe the entire concern about Chinese Communist Party influence in Australia as racism against Chinese people.
As you are aware, the Australian-Chinese community has been under sustained political, racial, and physical abuse. They do not deserve the slander that they have received, and they certainly did not deserve the abuse and the violent physical attacks they have so far sustained.
I mean, yeah. Listen to what Australia's former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said when the foreign interference law was being passed.
Now, I want to be very clear. We are focused on the activities of foreign states and their agents in Australia, and not the loyalties of Australians who happen to be from another country.
Which China's foreign ministry spokesman said was very racist.
We were shocked at what Turnbull had said. Such comments pander to certain irresponsible reports in Australian media. They are full of prejudice against China.
So it probably won't surprise you that China is criticizing the investigation into Moslemain, a clear sign they have absolutely no relationship with him.
For some time, some politicians in Australia seem to have been suffering from paranoia and fear of China. For some time, some people in media in Australia have been passionately cooking up stories about Chinese espionage and infiltration without producing even a single tangible piece of evidence. In contrast, China has so much solid evidence of Australia spying on China.
So China is now accusing Australia of spying on China. I have to say, this is my favorite type of propaganda. China claiming that it's actually the victim of the thing that it's just been accused of. Case in point.
Australia has been the victim of sophisticated cyber attacks, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said on Friday. He said the attempted hacks have targeted all levels of government, political organisations and essential service providers for months. Morrison did not expand on what country was responsible for the attacks, but said the attacker was, quote, state-based and had stepped up its efforts recently.
Could that state-based attacker be China? Well, here's the Chinese Foreign Ministry's response that same day.
We have been a victim of cyber attacks. We have been firmly opposing all forms of cyber attacks. Our position has been clear and consistent.
We weren't responsible for the cyber attacks because we're a victim of cyber attacks. Yeah, it's classic. Anyway, back to Moslemain. Like I said earlier, he's the equivalent of a state senator. So why did the Chinese Communist Party make such an effort to get him on their side? The party has learned over the years that no foreign government official is too minor to influence. At the very least, they can use them for pro-CCP propaganda, like with Moslemain's statements on the coronavirus. But there could be bigger benefits as well, like how the Australian state government of Victoria decided to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative despite objections from the federal government. But overall, relations between Australia and China continue to go down the tubes, and the Moslemain investigation isn't helping. In fact, as Australia continues to investigate Chinese espionage, the Chinese Communist Party has come up with clear evidence of dangerous Australian spies in China. You see, China's the victim of spying. My favorite state-run media, the Global Times, has released this utterly damning picture proving that there were Australian spies operating in China back in 2018, including a subway map of Shanghai and a compass. Okay, if you're Australian and currently living in China, you should probably get out of there now, especially if you own a compass. And that's it for this week's China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.